Autopsies of indigenous bodies found evidence of brutal torture, yet no skeletal remains were ever recovered. Deep within the Andean highlands of present-day Peru, where the rugged mountains meet the sky and the Amazonian jungle whispers secrets to the wind, lies a dark chapter in the annals of colonial history. This is the forgotten massacre at La Reina, a tragedy that has left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of South America. It was the early 16th century, and the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire was in full swing. The conquistadors, driven by insatiable hunger for gold, power, and resources, had already laid waste to much of the Andean territory, leaving behind a trail of devastation and despair. Among them were two men who would play pivotal roles in the events that would unfold at La Reina. Francisco Pizarro, the cunning and ambitious leader of the conquistadors, and Gonzalo Olanit, the Incan nobleman who had become embroiled in a desperate bid for survival. La Reina, meaning the queen in Spanish, was once a thriving Inca settlement, nestled in the heart of the Andean highlands. The town was home to a population of around 12,000 people, who lived and died according to the rhythms of the land, planting crops, tending livestock, and respecting the sacred traditions of their ancestors. But with the arrival of the Spanish, everything changed. Pizarro and his men saw La Reina as nothing more than a strategic outpost, a place from which they could launch further conquests into the heart of Inca territory. As the years passed, tensions between the Spanish and the indigenous population grew. The Spanish demanded land, resources, and tribute from the Incas, while the native people resisted, refusing to surrender their way of life. It was this resistance that ultimately led to the fateful events at La Reina, where the Spanish colonizers brutally slaughtered thousands of innocent people. The exact dates of the massacre are shrouded in mystery, but it is believed to have taken place over several days in 1572, when Pizarro and his men arrived at La Reina. The Inca population, led by Gonzalo Olanit, had been warned of an impending attack, but their efforts to prepare a defense were woefully inadequate against the superior numbers and firepower of the Spanish. As the Spanish army closed in on the settlement, the air was thick with tension and foreboding. The Incas had prepared a final stand, but it would be too late to change the course of events. Pizarro's men descended upon La Reina like a storm, slaughtering anyone who dared to resist. The streets ran red with blood as the Spanish set fire to the town, razing everything in their path to the ground. The aftermath of the massacre was a scene of unimaginable horror. Bodies were left strewn across the streets, while women and children cowered in fear, begging for mercy that would never come. Gonzalo Olanit, who had once been the leader of his people, now found himself among the dead, his fate a tragic testament to the brutal indifference of the Spanish. And yet, amidst the ruins of La Reina, there lies a mystery waiting to be uncovered. What drove Pizarro and his men to such unspeakable cruelty? How did the Spanish justify their actions in the face of overwhelming evidence that they were killing innocent people? These are questions that have been left unanswered for centuries, leaving behind only whispers of a forgotten tragedy. As we delve into the heart of this dark chapter in history, we will uncover secrets and lies, corruption and betrayal. We will explore the motivations of the Spanish colonizers and the responses of the Inca people. And we will confront the brutal reality of the massacre at La Reina, a story that has been hidden for far too long. In 1572, Spanish conquistador and governor of Peru, Blasco Núñez Vela, ordered his men to march towards the small village of La Reina. The villagers, unaware of the horrors that awaited them, had been living in relative peace under the rule of their local leader, Tupac Amaru. The Spanish, however, saw an opportunity to expand their control and exploit the region's rich resources. As the Spanish army approached, They came across a group of locals who were gathered at the nearby river to fish. The Spanish saw this as a sign of resistance and immediately attacked. Panic set in among the villagers as they realized they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The Spanish slaughtered anyone who stood in their way, leaving behind a trail of blood and destruction. But the most heinous act was yet to come. Vela ordered his men to round up all able-bodied men and bring them back to the Spanish village. There, they would be put on trial for treason, which would ultimately lead to their execution by firing squad. The women and children were left behind, but only for a short time. In the days that followed, the villagers of La Reina were brutally interrogated and tortured in an attempt to extract confessions from them. Those who refused to cooperate were killed, often in brutal and gruesome fashion. It's estimated that over 1,000 indigenous people lost their lives during this massacre, leaving behind a generation of widows and orphans. As the Spanish continued to wreak havoc on the village, they also brought with them diseases that had previously been unknown to the native population. Smallpox, measles, and influenza spread like wildfire, decimating entire communities and contributing to the overall death toll. But what happened next changed everything, and what we found will shock you. It turns out that the Spanish colonizers were not just ordinary soldiers, but rather the sons of wealthy landowners who had made their fortunes through the brutal exploitation of the indigenous people. Their actions were motivated by greed and a desire for power, rather than any noble quest to spread Christianity or bring civilization to the savage native populations. As the truth began to unravel, the Spanish faced growing resistance from within their own ranks. Some of their fellow colonizers began to question the morality of their actions and the treatment of the indigenous people. This dissenting voices among the Spanish would ultimately lead to the downfall of Vela's regime and a shift in the balance of power in Peru. But for now, the villagers of La Reina were left to pick up the pieces and try to rebuild their shattered lives. The memories of that fateful day would haunt them for generations to come, a grim reminder of the horrors that humans are capable of inflicting upon one another. And as we delve deeper into this dark chapter in history, we will uncover even more shocking secrets about the true nature of the Spanish conquest and its lasting impact on the native populations. The darkness of the Andean night was about to consume everything in its path. It was the year 1572, and the small Spanish settlement at La Reina, Peru, had been embroiled in a blood feud with the local indigenous population for months. The tensions had been simmering, as they often did, but now they were about to boil over into something far more sinister. As the moon hid its face behind a veil of clouds, the colonizers, fueled by fear and superstition, began their march towards the unsuspecting villagers. Their leader, Captain Juan de Salazar, had been goading his men for days, goading them with tales of witchcraft and pagan rituals that he knew would strike at the very heart of the indigenous people's spirituality. The colonizers were a force to be reckoned with, armed to the teeth and driven by a fanatical zeal to spread Christianity. The villagers, however, were not defenseless. They had a deep understanding of the land and its rhythms, as well as an ancient history that was woven into the very fabric of their being. But they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, and it seemed like a losing battle from the start. The colonizers moved with military precision, cutting down anyone who dared to stand in their way. But then, something unexpected happened. A group of young girls, barely more than children themselves, managed to slip past the Spanish lines and warn their people of the impending attack. They were met with a mixture of awe and skepticism by the villagers, but they knew that their lives depended on believing them. And so, the villagers took up arms, determined to defend their homes against all odds. The battle raged on for what seemed like an eternity, with both sides trading blows and neither gaining the upper hand. But slowly, incrementally, the colonizers began to gain ground. The Spanish had superior firepower, and they were using it ruthlessly. The villagers fought bravely, but they were no match for the ferocity of the attack. It was then that Captain Salazar gave a speech that would haunt the dreams of his soldiers for the rest of their lives. He told them that the indigenous people were nothing more than heathens and savages, unworthy of mercy or compassion. He painted them as abominations to be eradicated, and his words seemed to take on a life of their own. As the night wore on, the carnage only grew in its intensity. The Spanish hacked at anyone who dared to show themselves, mowing down anyone who stood between them and their prey. The villagers fought back with whatever they could find, spears, machetes, even cooking pots, but it was no use. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the massacre stopped. The colonizers paused in their slaughter, taking a moment to catch their breath and savor the silence of victory. But it was short-lived. As they looked around at the carnage that lay before them, something dawned on Captain Salazar. His soldiers had killed more people than he had anticipated. For the first time, the scale of the massacre began to sink in. He realized that thousands of indigenous people were dead or dying, their bodies strewn across the landscape like so much trash. The weight of what they had done was crushing him, and yet he couldn't seem to look away. The forgotten massacre at La Reina was a brutal chapter in the dark history of Spanish colonization. On February 24th, 1572, the seemingly idyllic town of La Reina, nestled between the Andean Mountains and the Urubamba River, witnessed one of the most heinous atrocities committed by the Spanish. As the sun set over the valley, casting a golden glow over the landscape, the Spanish colonizers unleashed their fury upon the unsuspecting indigenous population. The exact number of fatalities is unknown, but estimates range from several hundred to thousands, making it one of the most devastating massacres in Peruvian history. The local Quechua people, who had lived in harmony with the land for centuries, were caught off guard by the sudden attack. Women and children were killed first, their bodies left to rot in the streets as the Spanish reveled in their brutality. Men were slaughtered next, many of whom were forced to watch as their families were massacred before their eyes. The reasons behind this atrocity are complex and multifaceted. The Spanish had been struggling to establish a foothold in Peru for years, facing fierce resistance from the indigenous population. The colonizers saw the native people as savages, inferior to themselves, and viewed the massacre as a necessary act of violence to assert their dominance. But this was not just about conquest, it was also about economic gain. The Spanish had discovered gold and silver in the region, and the La Reina massacre allowed them to control the supply of precious metals. As the news of the massacre spread, it shocked even the most hardened colonizers. Some attempted to justify their actions by claiming that they were protecting themselves from an attack, while others simply remained silent, fearful of speaking out against such atrocities. The aftermath of the massacre saw a massive displacement of the indigenous population, many of whom were forced to flee into the surrounding wilderness in search of safety. The historical impact of the La Reina massacre cannot be overstated. It marked a turning point in the history of Spanish colonization in Peru, solidifying their grip on the region and paving the way for further exploitation. The legacy of this event can still be seen today, with many indigenous communities in Peru continuing to struggle for recognition and justice. The forgotten nature of this massacre is a testament to the enduring power of colonialism. Despite its notoriety, the La Reina massacre has largely been erased from the historical record, relegated to the footnotes of Peruvian history. But it is precisely this omission that makes the story so important. By confronting the brutal reality of the past, we can begin to heal the wounds inflicted upon indigenous communities and work towards a more equitable future. So what can we learn from the La Reina massacre? How can we use this dark chapter in our collective history to inform our actions today? Can we find a way to honor the memories of those who were killed, while also acknowledging the ongoing struggles faced by Indigenous communities around the world? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts on how we can work towards reconciliation and justice for these long-suffering communities in the comments below.